Michael, a pleasure to welcome you to our program, but not a pleasure in that, let's just begin with the very sad news. This is someone you've known for many, many years, I'm sure considered a friend, and I'm very sorry for your personal loss this morning.
Thank you for that. And I am reeling from the news because Bob had a kind of sense of immortality about him. He was very focused on the issue of time and life and the opportunity he had in the talents he had to do something positive and contribute something positive. I'm thrilled to know that he passed at what we called the Big House. There were 3 properties on the Sundance estate, the original A-frame house he built with it and settled with his wife, his first wife, and brought up his kids. The Mouse House, which was for his kids to play with, which was a replica of the A-frame, which was the first house. And then the Big House, which was the cathedral ceiling, very large, very spacious house that looked out at the Wasatch Mountains, and it was just beautiful. And he liked to be there. He was poetic by nature. He liked to be there. And when we were there, we were mostly talking about poetry.
Really? What kind of poetry? What would you share?
He was hugely affected by the beat poets, so especially people like Corso and Ginsberg and Gary Snyder, obviously, because of the kind of Zen, the Buddhistic thing that attracted him enormously, Alan Watts. But we like poetry generally. I mean, I remember when we came together, I met him in the Rockefeller Center, and I proposed doing this book and having his authorization, and he said, no, I'd never do that. He said, because I'm aware I kind of lead a double life. I have the life of a celebrity with the expectations that carries, and then I have my private life, and I don't think I want anyone in that life. And we got chatting, and we ended up quoting poetry to each other. And he was telling me that when he trained as an actor at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, one of his prestige pieces was doing The Raven in dramatic form, jumping from Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, jumping from window ledges and that kind of stuff, and showing his dramatic skills. So I was quoting to him, Helen, thy beauty is to me like those Nicean barks of yore, a poem called To Helen by Poe. And the fact that we could talk in poetry, it became a kind of lingua franca of our way of dealing and looking at his private life and allowing me, if you like, into his personal psychology. And he said very early on, we'll do this in 2 bits. There will be the celebrity me and there'll be the me. So the me will be harder. And that's why it took 15 years.
15 years to put the authorized biography together, and it was the definitive work. And capture then at the end of all of that time, I don't know if you were able to reconcile the 2 parts of Robert Redford, but what were you left at in terms of your understanding of the man?
Well, he was an artist, essentially, a visual artist. In the beginning, he wanted to be a painter and came to France and Italy and, literally sat in the streets trying to sell paintings. And when he went back to America in 1957, having spent a period of time in Europe, and he was at the Beaux-Arts in France and taking his art very seriously, his stepmother, Helen Coomber, she was the one who kind of pushed him towards the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, which had trained people like Kirk Douglas and Grace Kelly. And he got there skeptically, so he wasn't sure he wanted to do that. But very quickly his career took off, opportunities through a very good agent who introduced him to American television in the era of Playhouse 90 and the Rod Serling, kind of Paddy Chayefsky era. He got cast in a couple of very good TV plays, took off very quickly. And as he said, the idea of being an actor had never been in his game plan. So he kind of applied the instincts of, as he said, his visual art to trying to create, to project, and to create some kind of abstraction from acting and put that on the screen. And by, as he would say, by osmosis, celebrity happened to him. He didn't actually set out to be a great stage actor. He wasn't copying anyone. In fact, the actors he loved were anonymous people like Franklin Pangborn and Dana Andrews.
And how did he feel about Paul Newman? I have so many things I want to ask you, but I do, since you mentioned Oscar, when we think of their partnership and that incredible on-screen chemistry, what did you come to understand of that relationship?
Well, Paul, at the beginning, Paul advised me that I call the book one way or the other. He said, when you finish this thing, you have to call it The Late Robert Redford. And I said, The Late, that seems like a very kind of dark title. And he said, no, he said, the one thing about Redford that always annoyed me from the day I first connected with him on the set of Butch Cassidy in 1968 or 69, he said, was that he was late for everything. And he said, it wasn't amusing. It wasn't amusing. People thought, oh, it's very funny about Bob. But I learned, as someone who lived close to him for so many years, and he came and stayed at my home, and we rented a house for him near my home in North Dublin on the bay. I learned that if he said, let's get together at 3 p.m., we would get together at 9 p.m. So, I mean, that was just part of it. But Paul and he had a good relationship. It's not the relationship that is projected in the kind of celebrity media. They saw each other, irregularly. They had great respect for each other. And they wanted to create, which they did, of course, with The Sting. They wanted to create something that was kind of an enduring piece of cinema art. Bob would refer a lot to people like Orson Welles and directors he enjoyed. I mean, he didn't so much enjoy directors like Woody Allen, that he found too introspective and personal, although I adore him. But The Sting was something really special.
So that leads me to ask you about independent movies. When you talk of him as an artist, it explains it. But he, to me, as just a fan, eschewed the Hollywood machinery. And then, as you said at the beginning, Utah was so important to him. Sundance became so important to him. Did he sort of turn away from the Hollywood machinery?
He didn't like it. Mm-hmm. He said, we would spend time obviously together in quote unquote Hollywood. He had offices on Montana Avenue. But it was a very separate, he was very good at compartmentalizing his life. So the Hollywood thing, and, I sat in meetings with Disney executives where he hand wrestled about not wanting to walk down red carpets in Venice and Deauville and Cannes and things like that. So the Hollywood aspect of it was something that he kept in a box. The better part of Bob, his daughter Shauna said to me, everything of value you learn about my dad, you learn in transit, you learn in movement, on airplanes, in cars. He loved driving. I loved driving my car. I drive sports cars, and he loved driving sports cars. And horse riding, which when I went horse riding with him, he terrorized me because he would ride up to precipitous cliffs up the Wasatch Mountains and expect me, who was kind of a relative tyro, to keep my balance at the edge of a precipitous cliff. But you did learn from Bob, and the real Bob, the Bob that was the artist, the creator, who kind of, in some way created this catalyst that became celebrity. You learned that in those moments of movement with him.
Well, it's interesting that you mention movement, because we were reminded of his receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom back in 2016 from then President Barack Obama. And part of the citation talked about him as being an actor, director, producer, and as an advocate, he has not stopped, and apparently drives so fast that he had breakfast in Napa and dinner in Salt Lake. So maybe that speaks to the speed that you were just referencing.
Well, I used to say, when I was following him in his Acura, and I was in whatever I was driving, and we'd be crossing over the Santa Monica, over the mountains or whatever, I would say to him, you do know you drive like an arcade game. And he'd say to me, what are you talking about? And I'd say, you're dodging lanes so dangerously. And the irony was, he came to Dublin, and of course we've got narrow streets, and it's a steam-driven environment by comparison to Los Angeles. But I would be in my MG sports car, and he would be following me, and then he'd say to me, why are you driving so chaotically? So I realized there was this fetish in Bob, which was, he was kind of on a meta level examining the whole dynamics and the science and what he called the art of driving. This was one of his hobbies. This was a key to him.
Again, back to the art of something. But I'll come back to the more serious part of the citation from President Obama at the day. His art and activism continue to shape our nation's cultural heritage, inspiring millions to laugh, cry, think, and change. Is that a nice summation, do you think, Michael?
Yeah, I think, I said to him one day that as Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass was a lifetime work and it was one long organic work. I said I detected in him that when he was making movies, like he was very much a ghost writer on movies like Downhill Racer and The Candidate and the socio-political movies, All the President's Men, even though they were, written by William Goldman and other great writers, Dave Raphael. Um, Bob was always the ghost writer. And I said to him, there's something organic. I suspect your life's work is like Walt Whitman's, and on your deathbed to the very end, right till the old man and the gun, I could see it in him. He was essaying aspects of American life, Americana. He loved Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, as indeed I did, because Brian was on some kind of Americana trip as well. And Bob was on that same trip in a different medium. So he was doing Walt Whitman and Brian Wilson. He was synthesizing all those things. He was essaying American life. And he was doing that till he ran out of puff.
You did a documentary on the Beach Boys, so you shared that as well, a biography on Robert Redford, a documentary on the Beach Boys. You're giving us such incredible...
I'm just getting over losing Brian Wilson a couple of weeks ago in June 11, I think. Brian, I met him a couple of times. He was a very special person as well. Bob wanted to meet Brian and finally met him at the 1995 Sundance Festival when Don Was presenting the film I Just Wasn't Made for These Times, the Brian film. Brian and Bob were very different, obviously, temperamentally and in their essential kind of character, but they were very similar artistically.
There will be many discussions today as we react to this breaking news about individual roles and which was his greatest and which was his favorite. But you're giving such incredible personal insight that we're understanding him in an entirely different way. And I'm so thankful for that and for the time with you. As I said, I'm a fan, and I grew up really in that leading man phase for sure. So I don't know if magnetic is the best word that I can come up with, but it certainly is one that I would attach to him in terms of his on-screen performance. So as far as actor, really celebrated and influential mentor, director, which in terms of that part, just more the Hollywood component, Michael, where did he feel his greatest impact was?
Positively in his directing. He took incredible pride in Ordinary People, which was an essay about North Shore Chicagoans, but it was an essay about the kind of phatic nature of life, the hypocrisy, if you like, that we lead, the lives we lead to try and just, keep things going. That and The Legend of Bagger Vance, which was really associating with his interest in Alan Watts and Gary Snyder and the kind of idea of Eastern wisdom or forgotten wisdoms being important towards human sanity and civic stability. He was very intellectually active. Like when you saw him working on a script, as I did many times, and I saw him interacting with screenwriters, he was looking for minutiae and looking for revealing aspects of the human condition. So I think the real Bob, he was aware of his charisma, by the way. There was a funny thing I always said, my wife always said about being with Bob. If he wanted to be Robert Redford, he had this great Beatles haircut, this natural life Beatles haircut. And so the days he'd stay with you or whatever, and we'd go for a walk, he loved walking. He would say, I'll be Robert Redford today. So he'd leave his hair, his Beatle haircut blowing in the wind. But the days he didn't want to be Robert Redford, he wanted to be quiet and introspective, he would wear a French beret, like Gene Kelly and Les Girls or something.
Yes.
So he that was the two Bobs. And we joked all the time, which Bob do you want to be today?
That dual nature, that's so interesting that you saw it so closely and for so many years. Can I ask, it seems like you were in contact right through until the end of his life. Was he, as he approached 89, what a beautiful age to have reached, was he aware of, the end of life? Was he reflective at all? Can you talk about sort of last conversations you might have had?
Yeah, sure. I mean, he was very much into analyzing, the meaning of life, so to speak, and what the value of the artist was. He said to me many, many times he was grateful for the gift, and he didn't know why he deserved it, but it carried a responsibility, a cultural, a social, a family responsibility. He was really going till the end. He hated age. He hated the idea of slowing down. He hated when he became a little arthritic. He hated, for example, I made the mistake one night. We pulled into our local Chinese restaurant and we were driving in my sports car, and I went around this very low slung car, and I opened the door and made the mistake of, he was in his late 60s or early 70s at the time, of putting my hand in his armpit to help him out. And, and he gave me, he castigated, and I won't say what he said, but he said, "Listen, I don't need this, I'm 35. And I said, yeah, really? Okay, fine. Be 35.
Well, to many people's minds, he will forever stay 35 from some of the images that we have forever of him. What a beautiful friendship you shared, and how fortunate for us that we've had time with you so you could tell us about him and Robert Redford. I'm going to actor, director, activist, artist, first and foremost. I'm going to take that away.
Heather, I'll miss him. I loved him.
As so many did in different ways. Michael Feeney Callan, thank you so much. Biographer for Robert Redford.
Thank you.